Welcome into Pigskin Perspectives. We are a week past the Kansas City Chiefs once again becoming Super Bowl champions. So it's now time to take a look back at the season that was. So for the next two episodes, we're going to do a grading of all the teams. So today we'll do the NFC. Thursday we'll do the AFC. And basically just a grading on my thoughts on what the teams did this year. I'll explain if I have any thoughts for them going into next year, all that kind of stuff. Let's get straight into it because we're doing the whole NFC today. So we're going to start off in the NFC East. And of course, we start at the top with the NFC's champions, the Dallas Cowboys, who ended up losing in the wild card round as a 2 seed to the Green Bay Packers. They get a B+. They would have been probably an A- area if they didn't lose the way they did in the playoffs. Even if they actually made it, it was a close game and they barely lost, or if they made it to the divisional round, and even if they go on from there, then the grade gets higher. But once again, failing in the playoffs has taken them down in my rating, at least, because that's where you got to prove it the most. And that is not what the Dallas Cowboys did this year. Obviously, there were a lot of questions surrounding Mike McCarthy going into the year. Seemed like he answered a lot of them. And then all those same questions came back at the end of the year when they lost to the Green Bay Packers in just a stunner of a game because the Cowboys were never in that game. So, of course, questions around Mike McCarthy once again. And, Jerry Jones is sticking with him, which I think is a choice. I don't think it's the right choice. I think you probably could have gone out and got somebody better. But who knows? He's on the hottest of hot seats to start next year, I can tell you that. And I guess we'll see where it goes from there. Obviously, replacing Dan Quinn, the defensive coordinator, he got the Washington Commanders job, which is a team we will get to in a minute. But overall, I think it's a B+ for the Cowboys. I think the biggest thing going into this offseason is a potential extension for Dak Prescott. It still remains to be seen if that actually happens, but I think that is the big factor going into this offseason for the Cowboys. Moving on to the team that finished second place, that was the Philadelphia Eagles. They also made the playoffs. They were in control of the division until the last few weeks of the season. They fell apart. They played the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They lost in that game, so they also lost in the wild card round. And I give them a C. Everything just, it fell apart so much at the end of the year that it had to have an effect on their ratings somehow. That team did not look like the same team that played, weeks 1 through 9, I guess I would say. They had a very good start to the season. It looked like, they're going to win the East. They're a real threat of, going back to the Super Bowl, potentially facing the Chiefs again. And then it just all fell apart in November and especially December. Nick Sirianni made the odd decision of making Matt Patricia the defensive play caller, which very much hurt them. You could see the deterioration in that defense after that switch. And then just it all fell apart then. Jalen Hurts didn't look like the same quarterback. The defense looked awful. Nobody could do anything on offense, I guess I would say. So it wasn't just Jalen Hurts. And it cost them this season. So they earned a C. It could have been a much better season if they even looked like half the team that they did in September and October. In November and December, we could be having a very different conversation right now. The New York Giants, they earned a D+. They did not make the playoffs. They big struggle for them this year was the quarterback position. Daniel Jones just not being great, and then him getting injured and being out the rest of the year alternated him between Tyrod Taylor and Danny DeVito, or Tommy DeVito, I should say. Danny DeVito is an actor. Tommy DeVito, which that was a thing for 2-3 weeks. But the Giants need to figure out the quarterback situation. I don't think Daniel Jones is the guy. Tyrod Taylor isn't the guy. DeVito isn't the guy. I'm not saying you draft somebody because, past, I'd say, Caleb Williams, I think all the quarterbacks are massive question marks, which is, I think, saying something. I'm not sure about Drake May. I'm really not sure about J.J. McCarthy or Jaden Daniels. I know there's a few other ones there too, but I don't really trust any of them outside of Caleb Williams to, be a huge success in the NFL. So that's going to be a big factor for the Giants. They obviously parted ways with defensive coordinator Wink Martindale, so they bring in a new defensive coordinator, which should help there too. Defense was a big struggle all of this year. The question is, what's going to happen with Saquon? It really sounds like he's played his last game as a Giant. And if that's true, how do you go about replacing him? And how, the money that's freed up from that, where do you divert that to other things, basically? So that is going to be a major thing to watch for the Giants this offseason. And finally, for the NFC East, the Washington Commanders, they earn an F. They didn't make the playoffs. Ron Rivera got fired at the end of the year. This was just a disaster of a season in Josh Harris's first season as an owner of the Commanders. Just an absolute disaster. This team was never good. Sam Howell was never good. I think he ended up getting injured at some point during the season. And then you just had a rotation of quarterbacks that also weren't good. So you trade away Montez Sweat, Chase Young at the deadline, and it didn't work out well this year. Now going into next year, it might not work out either, because all the belief was Ben Johnson was going to be the next head coach of the Washington Commanders until the last minute when he said, no, I'm staying in Detroit, which I'm not, saying that he's wrong about that, because you can either be the offensive coordinator in Detroit and wait for a better job to come along, or take this awful Commanders job and possibly lose your job in 2 years. But they hired Dan Quinn, which is basically just like hiring Ron Rivera. So I don't see the Commanders getting any better. They got to figure out something at quarterback, because Sam Howell is not the guy at all. He's not that. So given that, we will move on to the NFC North, starting off with the NFC North champion Detroit Lions, who lost in the NFC title game after blowing a 24-7 lead at halftime. They earn an A. Now, this was a borderline A minus, if I'm being honest, because yes, the Lions were very good this year. I think they overachieved on their expectations, obviously, winning the division for the first time in 30 years, winning a playoff game for the first time in 32 years, making a conference title game for the first time in 32 years, being a half away from making the Super Bowl for the first time ever. All great things, but there are some things that obviously need to be refocused on this offseason. That defense, I know that they kind of picked it up in the playoffs when they needed to, But, I mean, that last stretch of the season, they were letting up points left and right. You have to get some secondary help. You have to get a second pass rusher. The secondary, I think that's the biggest thing for the Lions this offseason is getting, help in that secondary because it was looking very bad at the end of the year. And like I said, they kind of picked it up in the playoffs. It got them to the conference title. Just, it didn't end up being enough. So another big thing for Lions this offseason is probably extending Jared Goff, which he got you to an NFC title game, but I really don't know if he can get you any farther, if I'm honest. So I'd be a little bit careful with the money, but the Lions are going to give him a large contract, I feel. He is going to be the quarterback of now. I know they drafted Hendon Hooker. I don't think really anything ever comes of that, but Jared Goff's the quarterback, and now I'm expecting him to get a very big contract this offseason. Moving on to the Green Bay Packers, who I'm giving an A-. They lost to the 49ers in the divisional round. They blew a lead in the game and barely lost at the end. I give them an A-, even though their regular season record, they finished 9-8, I believe. They were the last team in the playoffs. Nobody expected this team to actually be good this year. Everybody expected them to be, 5-12 or 5-13 and just have a bad year. The Green Bay Packers did not do that. Now, yes, they had some games where they looked quite bad. But they had other games, like the game against Dallas in the playoffs, the game against Kansas City in the regular season, the Thanksgiving Day game against Detroit, the New Year's Eve game against the Vikings. That showed what the future potential of this Packers team is, and that future is so bright right now. The Packers, Matt LaFleur, I think, got a vote of confidence from the whole fan base. I know a lot of questions were being asked in the first year, post Aaron Rodgers, in the Jordan Love era now. A lot of questions were going to be asked. And by the end of the year, I think all those questions were answered. Now, that didn't lead to there being more questions during the season, but by the end of it, the questions were answered. Jordan Love is that guy for the future of the Packers, and Matt LaFleur is going to be the one leading them. And now we'll see what happens there. Obviously, they bring in a new defensive coordinator, Jeff Hatley, the former head coach at Boston College. So a head coach of a college team leaves for a defensive coordinator job in the NFL. You don't see that every day, but just given where the college game's going, it's going to lead me to believe you're going to see a lot more of that. The Minnesota Vikings, they earn a C-, mostly because the season was lost basically when Kirk Cousins got injured and was out for the rest of the season. I know there's a lot of talk about them possibly parting ways with Kirk Cousins this offseason, which I wouldn't be surprised by. But the season was lost. Not having a good backup was always going to be a problem. And, I mean, that's just what it played out to be, earn a C-. It also, I think, shows how much Kirk Cousins means to that team, or having a good quarterback means to that team, because Kellen Mond is not that. Josh Dobbs is not that. The Chicago Bears, they earn a D+. This was supposed to be a year where it kind of felt like you finally take a step forward under Eberflus and Justin Fields and the whole youth of the team. It was finally time to take a step forward. They really didn't do that step forward until the end of the year. And even then, there's still a lot of questions being asked about this team, especially given that they have the number one pick. Is the Justin Fields era already over? I'm not saying it should be, but Caleb Williams there at 1, you kind of got to take him, even though I think that's kind of setting up Caleb Williams for failure. But I also think if you parted ways with Eberflus this offseason, that was more indicative of them taking Caleb Williams than anything. And the fact that they stuck with him kind of leads me to believe that they might keep Justin Fields. And I don't know if that's the best idea for them, unless they get a just monumental trade package for that number 1 pick. I don't know how you don't draft Caleb Williams at 1. So moving on, we'll move on to the NFC South halfway through here. The NFC South champions were the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They got the win in the wild card round against the Eagles and then lost to the Lions in the divisional round. They earn a B. This whole division was quite awful this year, so you just had to find ways to win, basically. That's what the Buccaneers did this year. And the main focus this offseason is 100% going to be for them locking down Baker Mayfield. I don't know if it's the smartest idea. I know he just led them to the divisional round, but he still had those games this year where he just looked awful as a quarterback, and he has those games. He has games where he looks really good. He has games where he looks awful, and you're questioning why he's even a starter. You can't have that kind of inconsistency as your starting quarterback, I feel, because every game in the NFL means something, and you don't want that last game to be the game where he has an off game and then you're out of the playoffs. So I give the Buccaneers a B. We'll kind of see what they do now. Like I said, I think they'll lock up Mayfield, but past that, I really don't know what you do this offseason, because there's a team there. They're not like a Super Bowl winning team, but they're a division winning team because this division's so awful. Moving on to the New Orleans Saints, they earn a C+. It's just the whole cap situation has been hurting the Saints for years, and it's going to keep continuing to hurt them. And I don't see anything getting better for them. I think they're kind of just stuck in this cap purgatory right now, and there's no way out really until all that money's off the books. Then I feel like you can finally do a real rebuild, but right now you can't do that, and this team is going to continue being mediocre until you can do that full scale, tear it down to the studs rebuild. And I don't see that happening for the next few years just because of the cap situation they're in. The Atlanta Falcons, they earn a D. This Arthur Smith obviously fired at the end of the year. This just was a disaster of a year for them. Going back and forth between starting quarterbacks didn't help. That was just not a smart way to handle it for Arthur Smith. His severe lack of using his actual talents, also not great. Not using Bijan Robinson, not using Kyle Pitts. That's kind of an indictment on your coaching, and it's why he got fired. Now, Desmond Ridder is not a starting quarterback in the NFL, so that is the number one target for the Falcons this offseason, is finding a quarterback. I'm assuming they're going to go draft, but they're also, Justin Fields might be out there. Kirk Cousins might be out there. I think those are two talented quarterbacks that you can put in right now if you don't like what's going to be on the board, which is a very real possibility. I don't know if anybody's going to want to take a risk on some of these quarterbacks, past Caleb Williams. Then finally for the NFC South, we have the Carolina Panthers. Give them an F. Disaster of a season. And they can't even, take solace in having the number one pick because they traded it away last year so they could draft Bryce Young, who looked quite awful this year. Obviously, Frank Reich got fired week 10 or 11, somewhere around there. So they had a interim coach for the rest of the season. That didn't really help either. Nobody really wants to work for David Tepper, it seems. So it's going to be interesting what kind of leash Canales has, their new head coach, because from what it sounds like, David Tepper is a very hard person to work with. And we saw that with Frank Reich, obviously. He had a very, very short leash, and here we are, and he's not in a job anymore. The big thing for Canales is unlocking Bryce Young this year, because so far he looked awful last year. He didn't look like the number one overall pick. He didn't look like the guy you traded 3 first-rounders for, I believe. 2 or 3, somewhere around. I think it was 3. He did not look like that guy. And, if you're giving up that much draft capital for a QB at 1, you want them to be good immediately. And right now, he does not look like that. So that is going to be the biggest factor this offseason, is finding a way to unlock Bryce Young. And finally, we'll move on to the NFC West. The San Francisco 49ers, they earn an A-. Overall, they had a very good season. But once the stumbling block of the Super Bowl, this team was built so that they could go out and win that game. And when you blow a lead in that game again, and you barely got past your 2 opponents in the playoffs too, it's not a good look. And you got to start, I won't say reevaluating, but you got to start asking questions, because they needed a comeback victory to beat the Packers. They needed a comeback victory to beat the Lions. They had the lead against the Chiefs, and they blew it. And I think one of the big costs was the coin toss in overtime in deciding to take the ball instead of deferring, letting the Chiefs go down the field first, see what you need. Shanahan said that they were playing for the 3rd possession. If you're playing for the 3rd possession, you go for it on 4th and 4 at the 9 instead of kicking a field goal to only go up 3, knowing Mahomes has to go down the field to get a touchdown. And given what he did in that second half, you knew he was going to do it too. So, I don't know. They're an A-. It really hurt them the end of the season, the way the Super Bowl played out. Their overall grade, it was not great. The Los Angeles Rams, they earned a B-. Stafford missed a few games this year, so and then they sat him for the last game of the regular season just because there was no point in risking another injury. And then Carson Wentz play that one. The Rams had their star breakout performer this year in Puka Nacua. And if it weren't for him, I don't think the Rams end up where they were this year, which was a loss in the wild card round to the Lions. It was their first playoff game since they won the Super Bowl, which would have been 2 seasons ago now. So for them, I won't say it was a full rebuild, but it was a retooling, because obviously they gave up all those draft picks to get the talent that got them that Super Bowl 2 years ago. And overall, I think it ended up being a better than expected year for the Los Angeles Rams. Moving on to the Seattle Seahawks, they earn a C. Obviously, another year of question marks at quarterback. Geno Smith had some good games, had some bad games. Ends up leading to Pete Carroll stepping down / getting fired as head coach. He obviously gets moved up to the front office, so it wasn't really a firing, but it sounded like he wasn't thrilled on the head coaching position being taken away from him. I don't think anybody expected the Seahawks to be, an outstanding team this year, but they still weren't as bad as people thought they would be. Only missing the playoffs by 1 game is an accomplishment this year. And I expect Mike McDonald, the new head coach, to try to, figure out pieces to get this team back to, where they were, half a decade ago when Russell Wilson and Pete Carroll were just tearing up the NFC West and, making it deep in the playoffs each year, it seemed. And then finally, the last team of this NFC recap is the Arizona Cardinals. And I'm giving them a C-. Listen, not having Kyler Murray for half the season was always going to be a big factor. Not having a good backup quarterback, didn't help. Kind of feel like there was a little bit of tankish in there, lose as many games as possible so we get a high draft pick next year to, acquire some better talent, which somewhat worked out. And they'll still be picking early next year. I'd expect them probably to target a wide receiver for Kyler Murray. Doesn't seem like they're giving up on that experiment yet. And we'll see where it goes from here for the Cardinals. It's going to be year 2 under this new regime. So just kind of, once again, trying to figure out all those pieces. And I'd expect a better Cardinals team next year with a fully healthy Kyler Murray compared to this season where they only had him for basically half a season, even if that, because I think he played less than half the games. So given that is going to wrap it up for this NFC season grading. Like I said, we'll be back on Thursday to do the AFC version of it, which includes your Super Bowl champions, the Kansas City Chiefs. So thank you so much for watching this episode of Pigskin Perspectives. If you just stumbled across this video, click like, click subscribe, tell anybody you know about it. Make sure you tune in for that AFC team by team season grade. And hopefully we will see you then for another episode of Pigskin Perspectives.